Let's not pretend this room has power over me. Name your number, because I'm done paying attention to people who can't afford consequences.
I have sat on this bench long enough to see the darkest corners of the human soul. I have seen murderers tremble, fraudsters weep, and the innocent find hope. But every once in a while, just every once in a while, you encounter a different breed. The kind who walks into a courtroom not with fear, but with contempt. They look at the Constitution like it is a piece of scrap paper, and look at me like I am a waiter at a restaurant they own. That is exactly what happened last Tuesday morning. A day that should have been routine, but ended with a psychological earthquake that this courtroom will never forget. Do you want to see the moment when money crashes into the steel wall of justice? Do you want to see the face of a man who thinks he is royalty when he realizes his crown is made of plastic? Then smash that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because I promise you, you do not want to miss a single second of this case. Welcome to Judge Boyd's courtroom. It was November 14th, 2023. My clock read exactly 9:03 a.m. when the clerk placed case number 52CV889 on my desk. On paper, it looked like a typical civil suit, negligence resulting in bodily injury. But the moment those double doors swung open, I knew I was staring down a shark. The defendant walked in. His name was Sterling Vance, 38 years old, CEO of BioCore, a biotech conglomerate that had just gone public with a $1 billion valuation. He did not walk alone. He was flanked by an entourage of 3 lawyers in matching black suits, looking more like a legal security detail than defense counsel. Sterling wore a bespoke Navy Savile Row suit, the kind of fabric where a single yard costs more than an average person's annual salary. On his wrist sat a Richard Mille RM11-03, a watch worth roughly $300,000, and he kept rotating his wrist to ensure the overhead lights caught the sapphire crystal. He did not look at me. He did not look at the clerk. He was busy typing on the latest model smartphone, a scowl on his face as if his mere presence here was the ultimate insult to his precious time. But what made my blood start to boil wasn't Sterling's arrogance. It was the heartbreaking contrast on the other side of the aisle. The victim was Mr. Arthur Miller, 68 years old. He wasn't sitting on the bench. He was in a battered wheelchair, his right leg encased in a stark white cast, propped up painfully. Arthur was a veteran, a man who gave 10 years to his country and the last 20 years working the night shift as a security guard at BioCore's headquarters, the very building where Sterling sat in the corner office. Arthur wore a plaid shirt with a frayed collar, ironed as flat as possible. Beside him sat his daughter, a woman in her 40s, with dark circles under her eyes from worry. No expensive lawyers, no entourage, just a father and daughter, looking small and fragile against the giant across the room. The incident occurred on October 22nd. The police report was crystal clear. At 7:45 a.m., Sterling Vance drove his Ferrari Pro Sangue into a handicapped parking spot to make a board meeting on time. Arthur, on duty, politely asked Sterling to move the vehicle as it was blocking an emergency access route. Instead of complying, Sterling flew into a rage. He accelerated, deliberately ramming the barrier Arthur was standing next to. The impact threw the 68-year-old man onto the cold concrete, shattering his hip and severely injuring his shoulder. But the worst part? Security footage showed Sterling getting out of the car, not to help Arthur up, but to check his supercar for scratches. Then, he pulled a wad of cash from his wallet, threw it at the moaning man on the ground, and said, "Take it and go to a doctor. Don't bother me." I looked down at Sterling, who was still whispering to his lead attorney, completely ignoring my presence and Arthur's pain. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice low and cold as ice. He didn't look up. His lawyer had to nudge his arm. Sterling slowly raised his head, taking off his sunglasses with a slowness that was nothing short of a provocation. "Are we starting yet?" Sterling asked, his tone dripping with boredom. "I have a call with Tokyo investors at 11. Let's wrap this up." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. He thought this was a transaction. He thought he could buy his way out. He had no idea he had just walked into a lion's den. "Mr. Vance," I repeated, louder this time. "This is not a board meeting. This is a court of law. And in this room, your schedule means absolutely nothing to me." Sterling sighed, a a long, exaggerated sound that echoed in the quiet courtroom. He finally put his phone away, sliding it into his breast pocket as if he were doing me a massive favor. He stood up, but he didn't button his jacket, a subtle sign of disrespect in my court. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth, practiced, the kind of voice used to closing multi-million-dollar deals. Let's be reasonable. My client, Mr. Miller over there, had an unfortunate accident. My insurance company has already offered him a generous settlement, $50,000. That is more than he makes in 2 years. I don't understand why we are wasting taxpayer money on a trial. I looked at Arthur Miller. He was gripping the armrests of his wheelchair so hard his knuckles were white. $50,000 for a shattered hip, a ruined shoulder, and the loss of his dignity. For a man who could no longer walk without pain? Mr. Vance, I said, leaning forward. This isn't about insurance. This is about assault. You used a 2-ton vehicle as a weapon because you didn't want to walk an extra 50 feet to your office. Sterling chuckled. Actually chuckled. Assault? Come on, Judge. I barely tapped the barrier. The old man? He just lost his balance. He's frail. If anything, BioCore should be suing him for damaging company property. Do you know how much it costs to replace a carbon fiber bumper on a Puro Sangue? The audacity hung in the air like toxic smoke. He wasn't denying he hit him. He was blaming the victim for being too weak to withstand the impact of a Ferrari. You are claiming, I said slowly, ensuring the court reporter caught every word, that Mr. Miller is responsible for his own injuries because he broke your car with his body? I'm saying, Sterling replied, checking his watch again, that people like him, they see someone like me, and they see a lottery ticket. He probably threw himself on the ground the moment he saw who was driving. It's a shakedown, plain and simple. I'm a job creator, Your Honor. I have 5,000 employees depending on me. I don't have time for this. He waved a dismissive hand toward Arthur, as if the veteran were a pesky fly. Arthur's daughter stood up, tears streaming down her face. My father is a hero, she shouted, her voice trembling. He earned a Purple Heart. He worked double shifts to put me through college. How dare you? Order. I banged my gavel, but my eyes never left Sterling. He looked at the crying woman with zero empathy, just mild annoyance. See? Sterling whispered to his lawyer, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Theatrics. They want a payout. Just cut them a check for 75 grand and let's get out of here. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin. That was the moment. That was the moment the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He wasn't just arrogant. He was soulless. He viewed human suffering as a line item on a spreadsheet, something to be negotiated away with pocket change. I took a deep breath. I needed to remain impartial, but Sterling Vance was making it very difficult. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his wealth was a shield that could deflect any consequence. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dangerously calm, you seem to be under the impression that you can negotiate your way out of a criminal assault charge. Let me be very clear. There is no settlement here. There is no deal. You are facing a felony, and if convicted, you aren't going to a lunch reservation. You are going to a cell. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Sterling's face. Not fear, not yet, but confusion. Like a computer encountering code it couldn't process. A cell? He laughed, but it sounded brittle. Judge, be serious. I'm Sterling Vance. I don't go to prison. My lawyers, they'll bury this. They'll bury you in paperwork for the next 10 years if they have to. He leaned onto the defense table, looking me dead in the eye. Do you know who sits on my board? The governor's brother. Do you really want to pick this fight? I can buy this entire building and turn it into a parking garage for my employees. So let's stop the charade. The courtroom gasped. The bailiff took a step forward, hand on his holster. Sterling's own lawyers looked pale. He had just threatened a sitting judge on the record. He had just admitted that he believed his money placed him above the law. I sat back in my chair. A cold smile touched my lips. He had just given me everything I needed. He thought he was displaying power. In reality, he was digging his own grave. And he had just handed me the shovel. Mr. Vance, I said softly, you just made a very big mistake. The silence that followed Sterling's threat was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. His lead attorney, a man who likely charged $1,000 an hour, actually closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew what his client had just done. He knew that threatening a sitting judge with financial ruin wasn't a power move, it was legal suicide. But Sterling Vance didn't see it that way. He saw the silence as submission. He saw my lack of immediate shouting as fear. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face, looking around the room as if waiting for applause. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice dropping to a register so low that the court reporter had to lean in to hear me. "Did you just threaten to purchase a federal courthouse to obstruct a criminal proceeding? Because I want to make sure the record reflects exactly what you just implied." Sterling waved a hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic, Judge. I'm talking about economics. I'm talking about reality. The reality is, my time is worth roughly $50,000 an hour. We have been here for 30 minutes. Do the math. I have already lost more money standing in this dusty room than Mr. Miller will earn in his entire lifetime." Arthur Miller flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of his shoulders, but I saw it. He looked down at his cast, his face burning with shame. He wasn't ashamed of himself. He was ashamed that he couldn't defend his own worth against this man. "You measure a man's worth by his bank account?" I asked, keeping my face completely neutral. "Is there any other way?" Sterling shot back. He pulled out his phone again, ignoring his lawyer's frantic whisper to stop. "Let's look at the facts. I built BioCore. I employ thousands. I drive innovation. What does he do? He sits in a chair and watches monitors. He is replaceable. I am not." He tapped on his screen, scrolling through something. Then he looked up at me with a look of genuine pity. It was the most insulting expression I have ever seen directed at the bench. "And you, Judge," Sterling continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I looked you up. Public records are a beautiful thing. Your annual salary is set by the state, correct? Let me see. Yes, here it is. $178,000 a year." He laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "That's cute," Sterling said. "Really, it's quaint. Judge, I made $178,000 while I was brushing my teeth this morning. I made double that during the drive over here. Your entire annual salary, everything you work for, day in and day out, dealing with all these little people." He gestured vaguely at the gallery. "It's my pocket change." The entire courtroom froze. The stenographer stopped typing, her mouth slightly open. The bailiff took another step forward, his hand tightening on his belt. Even Sterling's own legal team looked like they wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Your salary is my pocket change," Sterling repeated, savoring the words. "So please, let's stop pretending that we are equals in this room. Let's stop pretending that your little gavel gives you any real power over me. I can buy and sell everyone in this room before lunch. Just give me the fine. Whatever it is. 5,000, 10,000. I have that in my wallet right now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick money clip. He tossed it onto the defense table with a loud clatter. "Take it," he said. "Consider it a donation to the court. Now, are we done? I really do have to go." I looked at the money clip. Then I looked at Arthur Miller, a man who had taken a bullet for this country. A man who was now broken because Sterling Vance couldn't be bothered to walk 50 feet. And then I looked at Sterling. He thought he had won. He thought he had just displayed ultimate dominance. He didn't realize that he had just handed me the keys to his destruction. He didn't understand that in this room, currency isn't green. In this room, currency is truth. And he was bankrupt. I slowly removed my glasses. I placed them on the bench. I folded my hands. "Mr. Vance," I said, "you are right about one thing. We are not equals." "We are not equals," I repeated, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "But not for the reasons you think." Sterling blinked. He had expected me to yell. He had expected me to threaten him with contempt of court immediately. He wasn't ready for a calm dissection of his entire existence. "You look at Mr. Miller," I said, gesturing to the man in the wheelchair, "and you see a security guard. You see a replaceable cog in your corporate machine. You see someone who earns in a decade what you spend on a weekend in the Hamptons. And because of that math, You think his pain is less real. You think his dignity is less valuable. I stood up. For the first time, I stood up from the bench and walked down the steps. I didn't stay elevated. I walked right into the well of the court, standing just a few feet away from the defense table. Sterling flinched, leaning back as if I were physically attacking him. Let me tell you what I see, I continued, my eyes locked on his. I see a man who took shrapnel in his leg 40 years ago to defend the very freedom that allows you to build your company. I see a man who raised a daughter on a single income, putting her through college while working nights, never complaining, never asking for a handout. I see a man who was doing his job protecting your property, your employees, when you decided that your convenience was worth more than his bones. Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off with a look that could freeze water. You talked about my salary, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that screamed louder than any shout. $178,000. You called it pocket change? You called it cute? I reached into my robe and pulled out my wallet. It was old leather, cracked at the edges. Do you know where that money comes from, Mr. Vance? It comes from the taxpayers. It comes from the single mother waiting tables at the diner down the street. It comes from the mechanic fixing cars in the freezing cold. It comes from Mr. Miller's paycheck. They pay me that salary because they trust me to sit in this chair and ensure that people like you don't crush people like them. Sterling looked away, unable to hold my gaze. He started tapping his foot nervously. You have billions, I said. You have private jets. You have properties in 3 different countries. But let me ask you something, Mr. Vance. If you lost it all tomorrow, if the stock market crashed and Biocore went under, who would you be? The question hung in the air. Without your money, I said, leaning in closer. You are just a man who assaults the elderly because he's late for a meeting. You are a man who measures human life in dollars because you have no other metric. You are spiritually bankrupt. This is character assassination, Sterling's lawyer finally shouted, jumping to his feet. Your Honor, I object. This is irrelevant to the case. Overruled, I snapped, without even looking at him. It is entirely relevant. Your client made his wealth the central argument of his defense. He claimed his money places him above the law. I am simply correcting the record. I turned back to Sterling. He looked smaller now. The swagger was evaporating, replaced by a simmering, petulant rage. You said you could buy this building, I said. You said you could buy everyone in this room. Well, Mr. Vance, I have bad news for you. You can't buy me. You can't buy the truth, and you certainly cannot buy your way out of what is about to happen. Sterling scoffed, trying to regain his composure. He checked his watch again, a nervous tick. Are you done with the lecture? Because I really am leaving. Send the fine to my office. He stood up. He actually stood up and buttoned his jacket, turning to walk toward the aisle. Bailiff, I boomed. Lock the doors. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut with a thud that shook the floor. 2 armed deputies stepped in front of the exit, their arms crossed. Sterling froze. He turned back to me, his face flushing a deep, angry red. You can't do this, Sterling hissed. This is false imprisonment. I will sue you for everything you have. I will ruin you. I walked back up the steps and took my seat on the bench. I picked up my gavel. It felt heavier than usual today. Mr. Vance, I said, sit down. You aren't going to lunch. You aren't going to your meeting. You are going to sit there and listen to the consequences of treating a human being like roadkill. Sterling looked at the guards, then at his lawyers. His lead counsel grabbed his arm and pulled him down into the chair. Sit down, Sterling, the lawyer whispered harshly. Shut up and sit down. Sterling sat. But the look in his eyes wasn't remorse. It was pure hatred. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a game he could win with a checkbook. You wanted to talk about value, I said, opening the sentencing guidelines on my desk. You wanted to talk about numbers. Let's talk about numbers. I looked at the prosecutor. Does the state have any additional evidence to present before I pass judgment? The prosecutor stood up. He looked nervous but determined. Actually, Your Honor, we do, and it doesn't concern the assault. Sterling's head snapped up. We received a file this morning, the prosecutor said, holding up a thick manila envelope from a whistleblower inside Biocore. Sterling's face went white. For the first time, the arrogance vanished completely, replaced by absolute terror. Mr. Vance, I said, eyeing the envelope, it seems your day is about to get significantly longer. Mr. Vance, I repeated, holding the manila envelope the prosecutor had just handed me. It seems your day is about to get significantly longer. Sterling's lead attorney, a man whose face had been a mask of bored indifference until this moment, shot out of his chair as if he had been electrocuted. Objection! This is an ambush. This is a simple assault hearing regarding a traffic dispute. Any internal corporate documents are hearsay, irrelevant, and likely privileged. I demand that evidence be suppressed immediately. It is not an ambush, the prosecutor replied, his voice steady but laced with adrenaline. It goes directly to the motive for the assault, Your Honor. And it goes to the defendant's character, which he has put squarely at issue by claiming his time is worth more than the victim's life. I waved the bailiff over. Bring it here. Sterling watched the envelope travel through the air like it was a live grenade. He knew what was inside. I saw the color drain from his face, turning that expensive tan into a sickly ash-gray pallor. He wasn't looking at his lawyer anymore. He was staring at the seal on that envelope, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. I opened the clasp. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the silent room. Inside were 3 emails and a security log printed on heavy bond paper. I put on my reading glasses and began to read. The first email was timestamped 7:15 a.m. on the day of the assault, exactly 30 minutes before Sterling ran over Arthur Miller. It was sent from Sterling Vance's private server to his chief technology officer. The subject line read, "The FDA knows. Purge the servers." The second email, sent at 7:30 a.m. I'm 10 minutes away. Do not let them in until I get there. Stall them. If those test results exist when they walk in the door, we are all going to prison. And then the incident report, 7:45 a.m. Arthur Miller stops an unauthorized vehicle in the emergency lane. I looked up. The silence in the courtroom had changed. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator realizing it had walked into a steel trap. So, I said, removing my glasses slowly and deliberately, you weren't late for a meeting with Tokyo investors, were you, Mr. Vance? Sterling didn't answer. He was staring at the table, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. You were rushing to destroy evidence, I continued, my voice rising just enough to fill the corners of the room. You were rushing to the office to wipe servers before federal agents arrived for a surprise audit at 8 a.m. And Mr. Miller, this man you called replaceable, this man you called a cog. I pointed at Arthur Miller, who sat stunned in his wheelchair. He hadn't known any of this. He thought he was just enforcing parking rules. He didn't know he had inadvertently saved evidence of a massive corporate crime just by doing his job. Mr. Miller was the only thing standing between you and a federal obstruction of justice charge, I said. This changes everything. This isn't just assault. This is assault with intent to facilitate a felony. You didn't break a man's hip because you were important. You broke his hip because you were panicked. That is speculation, Sterling's lawyer screamed, losing his composure completely. You cannot prove that in this court. You are a municipal judge, not a federal magistrate. This is out of your jurisdiction. I can't prove the fraud, I admitted, leaning over the bench. That is for the FBI, but I can certainly use this to determine your flight risk. And right now, Mr. Vance, you look like a man with a billion reasons to run. Sterling finally spoke. His voice wasn't smooth anymore. The polished CEO veneer cracked, revealing the desperate criminal underneath. It was a jagged snarl. You have no idea what you're touching, Sterling hissed. Biocore is too big. If I go down, the stock tanks. Pension funds lose millions. You want to be the guy who bankrupts grandmothers? You want to be the guy who stops cancer research? I am the only one holding it together. He was doing it again, hiding behind money, hiding behind the very people he was exploiting. Mr. Vance, I said, cold fury rising in my chest. You just tried to hold the economy hostage in my courtroom. Bailiff, take the defendant into custody. I am revoking bail immediately. The sound of handcuffs clicking was the loudest noise in the world. Sterling's eyes went wide with disbelief. You can't, he shouted as the deputies grabbed his arms. I have rights. My lawyer. Your lawyer, I interrupted, can visit you in the county jail, and he better bring a lot of quarters because I am freezing your assets pending a federal inquiry. As the deputies hauled him away, kicking and screaming like a toddler in a $3,000 suit, I looked at Arthur Miller. He was smiling, a small, tired, but genuine smile. But we weren't done yet, not even close, because as Sterling was dragged through the double doors, he shouted one last thing, a name that stopped everyone cold. Call the governor. Tell him Judge Boyd just declared war. I looked at the prosecutor. He nodded grimly. The war had indeed just begun. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, cutting off Sterling Vance's screaming threats. The silence that rushed back into the courtroom was deafening. Call the governor. The words hung in the air like a foul smell. Most judges in this city would have flinched. Most would have immediately called a recess to check their political standing. I just sat there. I looked at the empty defense chair, then at the stunned gallery, and finally at Arthur Miller. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice soft but carrying to the back of the room. I want to apologize. No citizen, regardless of their station, should have to endure that kind of disrespect in a court of law. Are you all right? Arthur cleared his throat. He looked smaller in his wheelchair without the looming presence of Sterling Vance, but his eyes were bright. I'm fine, Your Honor, he said, his voice raspy. I served in the Marines. I've faced worse things than a spoiled brat in a Ferrari, but I worry about the others, the people who work in that building. If he treats me like this, what is he doing to them? It was a profound question. Even in his pain, Arthur was thinking about his team. That is the definition of leadership. Sterling Vance had the title of CEO, but Arthur Miller had the soul of a leader. We are going to find out, I promised him. The federal authorities will have access to everything now. Just then, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open again. They didn't slam this time. They opened smoothly, confidently. A man walked in. He was older than Sterling, with silver hair and a suit that didn't scream money, it whispered power. He carried a single, thin briefcase. The air in the room changed instantly. The prosecutor stiffened. Even my bailiff looked uneasy. This was not a lawyer. This was a fixer. His name was Julian Thorne. He was the kind of man who didn't have a website, didn't have an office address listed, but had the personal cell phone numbers of every senator and judge in the state on speed dial. He was the man corporations called when they needed a problem to disappear quietly. Your Honor, Julian said, walking past the bar without waiting for permission. His voice was like oiled silk. I apologize for the late entrance. I represent the board of directors of BioCorp and, informally, the governor's office. He placed the briefcase on the defense table, right where Sterling had thrown his money clip earlier. Mr. Thorne, I said, leaning back, you are not the attorney of record for Mr. Vance. You have no standing here. I am not here for Mr. Vance, Julian smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Mr. Vance is a liability. The board has already convened an emergency meeting to vote on his removal. We are fully cooperating with the FBI regarding the discrepancies found in the server logs. I narrowed my eyes. This didn't smell right. They were cutting Sterling loose too fast. Then why are you here? I asked. To discuss the collateral damage, Julian said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. BioCorp employs 6,000 people in this state. Judge, if the company collapses because of a scandal involving falsified FDA data, those 6,000 people lose their jobs. The pension fund, which includes the teachers' union and the police union, takes a 40% hit. He slid the paper toward the bench. This is a motion to seal the record, Julian said. We want the assault charge to proceed. We want Mr. Vance punished. But the evidence regarding the servers, the whistleblower documents, those need to be sealed. For the good of the economy, for the good of the little people you care so much about. He looked at Arthur Miller. And, of course, the company is prepared to offer Mr. Miller a settlement of $5 million. Immediate payment, tax-free, provided he signs a non-disclosure agreement regarding what he saw that morning. The courtroom gasped again. $5 million. It was a life-changing amount. It was enough to fix Arthur's leg, buy him a house, secure his daughter's future forever. All he had to do was stay silent about the corporate crime. Julian turned his shark-like gaze to me. It's a win-win, Judge. You get your justice against Sterling. Arthur gets paid. The state economy remains stable. All you have to do is lock those whistleblower emails away and let us handle the internal cleanup. It was a devil's bargain. A perfect, logical, corrupt trap. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Arthur. He was staring at the check Julian had placed on the table. $5 million. Mr. Miller, I asked, do you have an opinion on this motion? Arthur looked up. He looked at the money. Then he looked at Julian Thorne. You want me to take the money, Arthur said slowly, so you can hide the fact that your company was poisoning people? Julian's smile didn't waver. We want you to take the money so we can fix the problem without destroying the livelihood of thousands of innocent workers. It's the responsible thing to do. Arthur looked at me. Judge, it's your decision, Arthur, I said. But know this. If you sign that, the public never knows the truth about the FDA data. Sterling goes to jail for assault, but the company survives to do it again. Arthur took a deep breath. He reached for the check. Julian's smile widened. And then Arthur Miller did something that made me proud to be a human being. Arthur Miller looked at the check. $5 million. It was a piece of paper that could erase every struggle he had ever known. It could pay off his daughter's student loans in a heartbeat. It could buy him the best medical care in the world for a security guard earning minimum wage. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. Julian Thorne watched him with the eyes of a snake, already mentally closing the deal. He reached into his jacket pocket for a pen, uncapping it with a soft click. Just sign on the line, Arthur, Julian whispered. And it's all over. You go home, a hero to your family. You secure your legacy. Arthur took the pen. His hand was shaking not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. He looked at his daughter. She was crying silently, her hands covering her mouth. She knew what this money could do, but she also knew who her father was. Arthur looked back at Julian. Then he looked up at me. Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. You asked me earlier what I saw when Sterling Vance hit me. The room went quiet. I saw a man who thought he was a god, Arthur continued. But right now, looking at this check, I see something worse. I see a bribe to let people die. He looked at Julian Thorne, his eyes hardening into steel. I spent 20 years guarding that building, Arthur said. I walked those halls at night. I knew the scientists. I knew the cleaners. They are good people. But if this Biocore drug is dangerous, and I take this money to hide it, then I am not guarding them anymore. I am helping you kill them. Arthur took the check. He didn't tear it up theatrically. He simply slid it back across the table toward Julian, as if it were a dirty napkin. Keep your money, Arthur said. My honor is not for sale, and neither is the safety of the public. The gasp from the gallery was audible. $5 million rejected. In a world obsessed with wealth, Arthur Miller had just performed a miracle. He had chosen truth over comfort. Julian Thorne stared at the check, his composure finally cracking. His face twisted into a snarl of disbelief. You are a fool, Julian hissed. You are an old, broken fool. You think this makes you noble? This makes you destitute. You will walk out of here with nothing. He will walk out of here with his head held high, I interrupted, my voice booming from the bench. Which is more than you will ever do, Mr. Thorne. I slammed my gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The motion to seal the record is denied, I ruled. Furthermore, in light of this attempted bribery in open court, I am ordering that the whistleblower documents be entered into the public record immediately. Clerk, scan them, upload them to the court docket, make them available to every journalist, every regulator, and every citizen within the hour. Julian's face went pale. You cannot do that. That is proprietary information. You will destroy the stock price. The stock price is not my concern, I said, leaning forward. The truth is my concern. You came into my courtroom and tried to buy silence. You thought because Mr. Miller is poor, he has no principles. You thought because I am a municipal judge, I have no teeth. You were wrong on both counts. I pointed at the bailiff. Deputy, escort Mr. Thorne out of this building. If he says one more word to the victim, arrest him for witness tampering. Julian Thorne grabbed his briefcase. He looked at me with pure venom. This isn't over, Judge. You have made powerful enemies today. I've made the right enemies. I shot back. Now get out. As Julian stormed out, defeated by a man in a wheelchair, the courtroom erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. People stood up. Strangers were patting Arthur on the back. His daughter was hugging him, sobbing into his shoulder. I'm so proud of you, Dad. I'm so proud. I let it go on for a moment. We don't see enough heroes in real life. We needed to savor this. But we still had one piece of business left. Sterling Vance, the prisoner transport door opened, and Sterling was led back in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit now, stripped of his Savile Row suit, his Richard Mille watch, and his dignity. He looked small. He looked terrified. He had missed the entire exchange with Julian. He looked around the room, confused by the energy. Mr. Vance, I said, calling the room to order one last time. While you were being processed, your associates tried to buy your way out of this. They failed. Mr. Miller refused $5 million to keep your secrets. Sterling's jaw dropped. He looked at Arthur as if he were an alien. He couldn't comprehend it. In his world, everyone had a price. The idea that someone would turn down $5 million was more shocking to him than the jail cell. He refused? Sterling stammered. He did, I said, because unlike you, Mr. Vance, he understands value. You know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I opened the sentencing file. You are facing federal charges that will likely put you away for decades, I said, but that is for another court. Today, you are here for assault, for the arrogance of thinking you could crush a man because he was in your way. I took a deep breath. Sterling Vance, please stand for sentencing. Sterling Vance stood up. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to the tailored navy wool he had worn just an hour ago. He wasn't checking his watch anymore. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at me, his eyes wide with the realization that his life, as he knew it, was over. Mr. Vance, I began, my voice filling the silent room. You came into this courtroom believing that the laws of this state did not apply to you. You believed that because you built a billion-dollar company, you had the right to crush a 68-year-old veteran because he was an inconvenience. I picked up the sentencing sheet. You told me earlier that my annual salary was your pocket change. You told me that you could buy this building. Well, Mr. Vance, I have some news for you. As of this moment, your assets remain frozen by federal authorities. You don't have pocket change. You don't even have pockets. Sterling flinched as if I had slapped him. For the charge of aggravated assault causing great bodily injury, I announced, I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed under the law, 10 years in state prison. Sterling's knees buckled. His lawyer grabbed his arm to hold him up. 10 years? Sterling gasped. For a broken hip? For the callous disregard of human life, I corrected. And I am not finished. Because you attempted to flee the scene to destroy evidence of a federal crime, I am designating you a flight risk. There will be no bail pending appeal. You will be transported directly from this courtroom to the state penitentiary to begin your sentence immediately. I looked at him one last time. You spent your life building a net worth, Mr. Vance, but today you are bankrupt in the only currency that matters, character. When you walk out those doors, you are no longer a CEO. You are no longer a billionaire. You are just inmate number 8,940. Take him away. The deputies moved in. This time, Sterling didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He simply wept. The man who thought he owned the world was dragged out of it, sobbing like a child, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of greed. As the doors closed behind him for the final time, the courtroom remained silent. All eyes turned to Arthur Miller. Arthur sat in his wheelchair, his hand gripping his daughter's. He had turned down $5 million. He had chosen integrity over comfort. In a world that constantly tells us money is everything, Arthur had just proved it means nothing without honor. Mr. Miller, I said, softening my tone, you may not have $5 million today, but you have something Sterling Vance never had. You have the respect of every single person in this room. And I have a feeling you have the respect of this entire city. And I was right. The story of Arthur's refusal didn't stay in the courtroom. The court transcripts were released. The whistleblower documents went public. BioCore's stock plummeted, and the corrupt board members faced their own indictments. But the real story, the story that went viral, was about the security guard who couldn't be bought. Within 24 hours, a GoFundMe page was set up by strangers who had heard about the case. They didn't raise $5 million. They raised $6 million from everyday people, mechanics, teachers, nurses who wanted to show Arthur that good deeds do not go unpunished. Arthur used the money to fix his hip. He bought a modest house with a garden for his daughter, and he donated the rest to a fund for injured veterans. That is the difference between net worth and self-worth. As for me, I went back to my chambers that afternoon. I sat down at my desk, looked at my old leather wallet, and thought about Sterling's insult. Pocket change. I smiled. I may not have a private jet. I may not have a Ferrari. But that night, I went home and slept the sleep of the just. Justice isn't about how much money you have. It's about what you stand for when the money is gone. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if you believe that integrity still matters in this world, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Let's remind the world that there are still judges like me and heroes like Arthur Miller, holding the line. I am Judge Boyd. Court is adjourned.